Elijah Carter had everything. Billionaire tech genius, philanthropist, and a symbol of success. He grew up in the projects, fought his way to the top, and now owned a mansion that looked like something out of a dream. Despite his wealth, Elijah had never forgotten where he came from. His mother had sacrificed everything for him, working double shifts and skipping meals just to keep him fed. Now, he wanted to give back to her in a way that truly mattered, by surprising her with the perfect home, a place where she could wake up to the sunrise over the city and finally live without worry. That's why he walked into the high-end real estate agency that afternoon, dressed in a crisp black hoodie, designer sneakers, and a luxury watch that gleamed under the showroom lights. The agency was sleek and modern, its walls lined with glossy property brochures and framed pictures of million-dollar homes. You've already started watching. Now stay with me because you're about to hear a story that will pull you in from the very first second. A story of power, prejudice, and an unexpected twist that no one saw coming. What happens next? It was a bold and brilliant move, one that changed everything. Let's begin. As soon as he stepped inside, conversations halted. A woman at the front desk glanced at him, then quickly looked away. A few agents whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking toward him with poorly concealed curiosity. Elijah knew that look. He had seen it before. The look of people trying to decide if he belonged. Finally, a tall blonde realtor approached, her face wearing a professional yet rigid smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of politeness that felt rehearsed. Elijah nodded, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, I'm interested in the penthouse at Skyview Towers." Her smile faltered just slightly. "I'm sorry, but that property is for exclusive clients." Elijah let out a small chuckle, pulling out his sleek black credit card and placing it on the counter. It was the kind of card with no spending limit, one reserved for the ultra-wealthy. "I think I qualify," he said evenly. The woman hesitated, then picked up the card. As she ran it through the system, her expression slowly changed. Her brows lifted, her posture stiffened, and she swallowed hard. "Oh," she stammered, "you're..." But before she could finish, a man emerged from the office behind her. He was tall, with sharp blue eyes, and a suit so crisp it looked like it had been pressed moments ago. He was clearly the manager. He stepped forward with a practiced air of authority and placed a firm hand on the receptionist's shoulder. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "That listing is no longer available." Elijah's smile faded. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "That's interesting," he said, tilting his head, "because I just saw it on your website 5 minutes ago." The manager didn't even blink. There was a mistake. A slow heat rose in Elijah's chest, but he kept his face neutral. He had dealt with this kind of treatment before. The veiled dismissals, the sudden mistakes, the unspoken rules that certain people weren't welcome in certain spaces. "A mistake," he repeated, his voice dangerously calm, "or just the wrong kind of buyer." The room fell into silence. A few agents shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. The blonde realtor looked frozen, torn between her job and what was happening right in front of her. Then, the security guard stepped forward, his posture stiff with authority. "Sir," he said, his voice firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elijah wasn't the type to let injustice slide. He had spent too many years proving people wrong, too many times walking into boardrooms where he wasn't expected to belong, only to walk out as the owner of the company. This moment would be no different. With a calm, practiced motion, he pulled out his phone and started recording. The red light blinked. Every word, every action, was now being documented. "I came in here as a paying customer," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But for some reason, I'm being denied service." The manager's face twitched, a flicker of annoyance crossing his sharp blue eyes. "Sir, we have the right to refuse. Because I'm black." Elijah cut in. Silence. The tension in the air thickened like a storm cloud. A couple of agents exchanged uneasy glances. The receptionist looked down, suddenly very interested in her keyboard. The blonde realtor, Rachel, according to her name tag, shifted uncomfortably on her feet, her lips slightly parted as if debating whether to speak. "Sir, please." The security guard, a stocky man in a navy uniform, stepped forward and reached for Elijah's arm. Elijah took a sharp step back, his voice turning cold. "Don't touch me." The guard hesitated, but before Elijah could react further, the office doors swung open, and two more security guards stepped in. Their expressions were unreadable, but their presence sent a clear message. This wasn't just a casual refusal. It was a setup. Elijah's stomach twisted. They had expected him to get angry, to push back, to cause a scene. They wanted a headline: "Angry Black Man Removed by Security." It was a game he had seen played too many times before. He exhaled slowly, forcing his pulse to steady. He wasn't going to give them what they wanted. Then, just when it seemed like the moment would spiral into something ugly, an unexpected voice cut through the silence. "I'll show him the property." The words came from Rachel. All eyes snapped to her. The manager turned sharply. "What?" Rachel lifted her chin, her hands clenched at her sides. "He's a qualified buyer, and I don't discriminate." The office fell into stunned silence. Elijah's eyebrows raised slightly. For a long second, the manager just stared at her, his lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. Then, slowly, his expression darkened. "You're fired." A collective gasp rippled through the office. Rachel blinked, but to Elijah's surprise, she didn't flinch. Instead, she reached up, unpinned her name tag, and with a sharp flick of her wrist, tossed it onto the desk. "I quit." Murmurs broke out among the other agents. Some looked shocked. Others looked impressed. Rachel turned to Elijah, her gaze unwavering. "Let's go see that penthouse." Elijah looked at her for a beat longer. Then he slipped his phone back into his pocket and nodded. "Lead the way." The security guards hesitated, glancing at the manager for instruction, but the older man didn't say a word. His jaw was clenched, his face flushed red with barely contained rage. As Rachel and Elijah strode toward the elevator, the tension in the room remained thick. But Elijah wasn't thinking about that anymore. Now he was thinking about something else, something that didn't sit right. This wasn't just racism, it was a trap. And the question was, who had set it, and why? The elevator doors slid shut, enclosing Elijah and Rachel in a sleek, mirrored box as it began its smooth ascent to the penthouse. The hum of the moving lift was the only sound between them. Elijah exhaled, glancing at Rachel, who stood with her arms crossed, staring straight ahead. "You didn't have to do that," he finally said, his voice quieter now, stripped of the tension from before. Rachel shrugged but didn't look at him. "I did." Elijah studied her for a moment. There was something about her, something unreadable, a quiet defiance, but also a nervous energy beneath it. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal the penthouse. Elijah stepped out first, his eyes immediately drawn to the breathtaking sight before him. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a panoramic view of the glittering city below. The marble floors gleamed under the warm glow of recessed lighting, and a grand chandelier hung like a piece of modern art in the center of the open living area. He let out a low whistle. "Now this," he muttered, "is what I call a view." Rachel smirked, watching him. "You haven't even seen the bedrooms." "I don't need to." Elijah reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. A few taps, and he was ready to wire the payment. It wasn't about the penthouse anymore. It was about the principle. About walking into a space where they thought he didn't belong and proving, without a shadow of a doubt, that he did. But just as his thumb hovered over the send button, Rachel grabbed his wrist. "Elijah, wait." He looked at her, confused. Her expression had changed. The smirk was gone, replaced by something serious. "There's something you need to know," she said. Elijah frowned. "What?" Rachel didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the city below as if searching for the right words. "This whole thing, it wasn't random," she finally said. Elijah's stomach tightened. He had suspected as much. "What do you mean?" Rachel turned to face him. "They knew who you were the moment you walked in." Elijah's mind raced. Why would they? And then he saw it. A small red light, blinking near the corner of the ceiling. His gaze locked onto it. A security camera. At first, it seemed normal. Most high-end buildings had surveillance for safety. But then something clicked. The angle, the placement, the way it wasn't directed toward the door or the furniture, but right at them. His pulse quickened. They were recording everything, Rachel said, confirming what he had already begun to piece together. Elijah clenched his jaw. They wanted a reaction. Rachel nodded. The moment you walked in, they knew exactly what would happen. They knew how the manager would respond, how security would handle it. They wanted you to lose your temper, to give them something they could use. Elijah exhaled sharply. "A setup," he muttered. Rachel folded her arms. If you had fought back, even just raised your voice, they would have had footage to spin a narrative. Billionaire loses cool in luxury real estate office. Elijah's fingers tightened around his phone. He had spent years crafting his image, building his reputation. But he knew how quickly public perception could be twisted. One viral video taken out of context, and suddenly he wasn't a tech mogul anymore. He was an entitled billionaire throwing a tantrum. Rachel's voice softened. "I think they wanted more than just a viral clip." Elijah met her gaze. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "The company that owns this real estate firm, it's connected to investors who have been trying to keep certain buyers, especially ones like you, out of key properties. And you're not just any buyer. You're a symbol of everything they don't want to change." Elijah exhaled, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about one property. It was about power, about control. And suddenly, buying this penthouse wasn't enough. He needed to think bigger. Elijah slowly put his phone away and turned back to Rachel. "We're not done yet," he said. Rachel took a deep breath before speaking, as if choosing her words carefully. "The owner of this real estate firm," she said, "is part of a group. A very powerful, very private group. They control which buyers get access to certain properties, especially in areas they consider exclusive." Elijah's hands curled into fists. He had known discrimination all his life. But this was different. This was orchestrated, strategic. "They knew you'd come," Rachel continued. "They planned this whole thing. They wanted to humiliate you." Elijah's jaw tensed. "Why?" Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because you're proof that they've lost." Elijah exhaled sharply, his mind racing. "They wanted me to react," he said, "to make a scene." Rachel nodded. "They wanted a headline. Angry black man gets removed by security." They wanted to paint you as a problem. Someone who doesn't belong, even when you've earned your place more than anyone. Elijah ran a hand over his face, letting the weight of it settle in. He had spent years fighting against this kind of thinking, proving time and time again that success wasn't determined by where you came from, but by how hard you worked. And yet, here he was, a billionaire, still having to fight just to be seen as an equal. His anger burned deep, but not recklessly. No, he had learned long ago that the best way to win was not through rage, but through power. And then, a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He turned back to his phone, tapped a few buttons, and hit send. Rachel frowned. "What are you doing?" Elijah looked up at her. "I just bought the penthouse." Rachel's eyes widened. "You? And tomorrow, Elijah continued, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "I'm buying the whole building." Rachel gasped. "Wait, you're serious?" Elijah smirked. "I don't joke when it comes to real estate." He turned to the security camera, the red light still blinking, still recording. He raised a hand and waved. "You tried to shut me out," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "Now, I own the door." The aftermath. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Billionaire Elijah Carter exposes racist real estate plot and buys the building instead. The story was everywhere. News stations replayed the footage from Elijah's phone, the moment the manager denied him service, the way security tried to escort him out. The video went viral. The world watched as a billionaire who had been treated like an outsider turned the tables in the most poetic way possible. The fallout was swift. The manager, fired. The real estate firm, under federal investigation. And Rachel, she became the head of Elijah's new real estate division, dedicated to making high-end properties more accessible to people who had been kept out for too long. As for Elijah, that evening, he stood on the balcony of his new penthouse, looking down at the city that once tried to keep him out. Not anymore. This was his. And the door that had once been closed. He had torn it off its hinges. And just like that, the game was won. But now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this twist? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.